to
Hello, I'm TJ Hawkins, and today we're here to talk about burnout in technology.
Hello, my name is Henri. I'm here to talk about burnout in technology, but when I'm not, I'm working at this wonderful company called Catchpoint.
My name is Matt Stuffer, and I'm a partner, CTO, and COO at Titan, which is a Laravel consultancy.
Go ahead.
I'm Jessica Vaughn. I'm a tech educator with a couple of nonprofits, and I like to live stream coding and show things to people about the dev world.
I am Xavier. I've been burned out a few times. I'm a Pluralsight author, and I work at Lupo.ai.
Thank you, everyone, for the introductions. I'd like to start out by just saying that I'm currently burned out. I've been burned out for a number of years, and I thought it was a good idea that we openly discuss what it is to be burned out and have a way for others to be able to identify, hey, I'm burnt out too. What should I do about it?
Go ahead.
So I'm going to ask you,
Yeah.
when did you first realize you were burnt out?
I think I realized it about a couple of months ago. I was feeling like I didn't have any control over what I was doing, and that it takes time to recover from burnout. And I'd felt the same way from job to job to job, and that I was just compounding it over the years, and that whatever I do next, I need to have a way to recover some before I get right back into whatever I'm going to do and continue my streak of burnout, which I would rather not have.
Well, see, you said like a streak, and I think when you brought it up, we've already heard a couple times that like people go through cycles of burnout. Like I feel like when it was first introduced, getting into the field, people talked about it like it's a one-time thing versus I've heard that, it can stack up and some people have done it over and over again. So not sure if you like how you all have experienced it. Definitely have been on like years long series of burnouts, and it's kind of like eventually how do you realize that that's what you're going through, or are there symptoms that people have?
Yeah, some of the symptoms are things like exhaustion. I've got them written down because I didn't want to forget cynicism and efficacy. And so I know from personal experience that I've been a cynic for a long time, just, making stupid comments about things at work, and definitely fallen into the exhaustion realm as well. I do sleep a lot because of working. Even if I don't work a lot, my brain gets exhausted and just tired.
When did you realize you were burned out? Or was it like a one day you're like, oh crap, I feel like crap, or you were like, I'm getting there.
No, it was kind of a revelation. I was trying to figure out, why do I feel like this? And so I was like, I wonder if this is burnout. So I started looking it up, and that's when I said, yeah, I think I'm hitting all these marks of why it is the way it is. And your health declining is another piece of that. And I had a heart attack last year due to probably being burned out, along with family history. But, I'm not old enough to really be having a heart attack. And some cultures, people work themselves to death, and it's not healthy either. And that's another form of burnout.
I experienced something similar. For me, it was like very intense mental, like depression, and I had to go through like a lot of therapy. And I think for me, I was saying like, yes, I'm burnt out, but I still felt like that was a cop-out answer at the time. And I didn't really understand how truly burnt out I was, how much anxiety had. And then it turned into imposter syndrome. And I'm like, I'm getting like promoted at my job, but I feel like completely unqualified. Like, where is all this coming from? And it took a long time. And one of the things that I learned through that process as well was that you could grieve for like an identity loss that was something I went through at the time because it was like, okay, well, now I have to make the choice of, do I want to walk away from my job right now? And I worked so hard to get here, and this is who I am as a person. Of course it's not, but yeah, so that was interesting. Not sure if you all have ever like had that kind of experience of, having to part from something in order to like, sustain yourself throughout burnout.
So I went through that, and the reason was, so when you start a company, it's like a marriage. I mean, you're with your co-founder all the time, and I picked the wrong one, or he picked me actually, because he was a Microsoft employee. He left, and I joined him and started a company. But the thing is that this guy was nuts. It's just a way to describe it. So he one day asked everybody like, "Hey, you're having limited PTO," and then the next day is like, or next 2 weeks or something, somebody asked like for 2 hours, and the guy almost kills them. And he worked everybody to exhaustion, and he was changing, ideas every day. Went and modified the code at night. Every morning you had to undo all of his changes from the source control. So it got to a point where one day I was like, I just tell find someone else. I closed the laptop. It took me like 5 years just to post-traumatic stress disorder. I think that's even worse than burnout. But I was so burned out that I couldn't sleep very well. I felt really bad. It took me a long time. So it was not the amount of work. It was the stress around the work. And it took me forever to identify that I needed to leave.
And dysfunctional work environment is another cause for burnout.
Yes.
Did you, if you don't mind me asking, during the 5 years after leaving, and what sounds like 5 years to sort of undo that, sort of like damage, if you want to call it that. Were you working somewhere else at the time as well?
Oh yeah, I had half a day off. I just called. So here's the thing: when I quit, I just called one of my best friends, and when he takes the phone, takes the call, he's like, "Are you gonna work for me?" I'm like, "Dude, I quit 45 minutes ago." He's like, "Dude, we have a position for you." I was just joking because we need you. So I went Monday. I got interviewed by his superior and his manager, and I start working like literally the next day. So I was unemployed for like half a day, but so I could work normally, and I was actually very happy. That job helped me, but it took me 5 years to stop having like nightmares. And when I saw that guy, I mean, he lived in Bellevue, and I lived in Costa Rica, so we rarely met. But there was one day I literally bumped with him. I was just walking like so. I was like, I still felt like. So it was really, really, really hard, but I was able to function well. Just that, I don't know, like a dog that gets beaten all the time, So I felt like that.
And I may be asking most of the questions here because I don't think I've had burnout yet.
Fingers crossed, knock on wood. Yeah.
Hope this is wood. Laminate.
Right, knock on laminate. It works.
And but the one thing that I do try to make sure of is I get like me time, and me time could be could look different for everyone here, but I insist on doing it because I feel like it just gives me that moment to exhale, and just go have like my own little fun. For example, on my way here, so I'm from Toronto, by the way.
Okay.
And, I'm on my way actually somewhere else after this. But the point was like, I'm a runner as well, distance runner, and I happen to sort of fall right in line with like Boston Marathon. So I left Toronto, went to Boston for like 4 days, worked from there, but, I was preparing myself. Ran on the Saturday, then kind of came here, and that little block of time was like me time, and it brought me the joy that I needed to. No matter what happens this week, I'll ride that out because it's like I left Boston with a medal, and I felt great, and I saw some friends. Did any of you two have like, or any of you three so far, because you've all shared the moments of trauma? Have you had? Or do you look back and say, like, man, maybe I should have given myself a little bit more me time here or me time there?
I actually think it's interesting because I think my me time was what burned me out. So in the daytime, I'm working as a full-time engineer, and there's a lot of just demands on my mental. Like you said, you get really exhausted, but I felt like the work I was doing was very different than the work that I wanted to be doing. So, and then in the evening, I'm live streaming. I'm trying to learn a completely different code base, and then I'm also running conferences and things. So it was all the things that really I enjoyed so much and didn't want to separate from. But after years and years of just being like around the clock, eventually it just started to show through my work, and other people didn't see it, but I saw it. So I was like, maybe there's other ways of exploring me time, which I've been trying to look into. But definitely, I'm like one of those go, 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 like used to run all the meetups type of person. So that was a little bit detrimental after a while.
For me, it was biking. That's kind of my me time. Just that I joined the group, but I initially joined the wrong group because they just come and they do like a test to see how far you can go. And they're like, we go out every weekend. I was like, yeah, I can go out this week. So where are you going? It was a place that was 100 miles away. So 100 miles riding on the bike. I was like, no.
It sounds like the same
Took me 6 months to be able to go the first time with them, which I only did. It was like 60 miles. Now I can do the 100 mile on the bike, but it took me like a lot of time to get there. But talking about burnout now, coming back to the work thing. So I was my day job. Eventually, I started working on building my company. So I had to work days and nights. So from 8 o'clock to like 5 p.m., it was my day job. And then from 8 p.m. to midnight, it was my night job. It took me many years to be able to become independent. So like 5 or 6, with a plural site. But that thing that working all day was almost killing me. Almost killed me. But the only thing that helped is because when I was doing a context switching, so you do one thing during the day, another thing during the night, that actually prevented burnout. If I was working days and nights on the same thing, probably I would have been burned out a lot worse than I was actually burned out. But the exercise really helps you, and that doing two different things actually strangely helps you too, because you context switch.
For me, I like to learn. And after working and just being exhausted from that, I didn't want to sit in front of the computer again to try to learn and new content. And it makes it where you're kind of stuck in this loop then that, well, if I learn this new content, I'll have more skill set. I can go do something else. And so you're kind of just stuck at that point. I've considered leaving the industry altogether, which I don't really want to do because my wife would probably get really upset with me for having to make a lot less by switching to something else. But yeah, I've done the exercise, the same thing. I just get so exhausted. It's like I don't want to do the exercise. I can do it. I just don't want to do it.
I've personal experience with outside of burnout context with depression and complex PTSD, and we've all at different points mentioned the word depression, mentioned PTSD, and if you listen to a lot of things we're saying, and I've had burnout too, I haven't identified it as well, but I've had work-related burnout, but if you listen to things we're saying, you hear a lot of parallels with them, like can't get up off the couch, can't motivate myself to do the thing, sleep a lot, trauma responses and stuff like that, how you feel when you see your partner and stuff like that, and it's curious to me that even if we've been talking about the me time and we're diving into what aspects of me time are the things that help with PTSD and help with depression, and which aspects of me time actually harm those things. And so like you were talking about exercise, and like exercise is one of the main things that helps with depression. And so we were talking about these various elements of like in work and in personal time, how do we choose whatever we're doing, whether it's too much or too little or fun or not fun, how do we choose the things that are specifically noted to help with this? And one of the things that led me towards, and I'm actually going to ask a question as well, is that I've had employees deal with burnout who have work 40 hours a week, they don't do too much in the evenings, they're not pushing themselves too hard, they're exercising well, everything is perfectly regulated within their lives, and they still have work-related burnout. And I think that's been the area when I'm still trying to understand it. And it seems to me like it has something to do with lack of agency, or feeling like they're not, like the imposter syndrome you were mentioning, feeling like they're not in a place where they're the right person for it. And like one of the people who went through the most in-depth work through this ended up saying, oh, I am in the wrong industry, and went and became a city planner and now is in the happiest place of his life.
Yeah.
And it was the wrong fit. So do you all have thoughts about ways where it sometimes has to do with my life is too busy or I'm doing certain other things, but some of them may have to do with what is our relationship with work and like where does that take y'all's brains?
A sense of purpose. If you are working on something that you believe in and that you're like happy, that makes it much easier. Because the one thing that I always tell people is that it's not the same thing to have 10 years of experience versus 1 year of experience that you do it 10 times. In that second scenario, if you're just doing the same thing over and over again, you get to start burnout. You know, my dad had one job. Well, he worked in one company from when he was 21 to when he retired at 60 something.
Wow.
I'm like, how could he do that? But he was happy. He never got burned out. But I'm not that kind of person. I mean, but that's the thing. If you're always doing the same thing, at some point you start to get bored or burned out. So,
You know, I believe also you can get into what seems like an ideal situation, like you'd mentioned, like, 40 hours, it works out at night. They, may have like, great lifestyle, whatever it might be. But, something's, as simple as like a reorg, where suddenly you have to deal with particular people who you may have sort of like a professional clash with, and just the idea of stepping into the office and knowing that this person is around. They may peek in and micromanage and things like that, and that's enough to get your heart racing. And you suddenly have what may seem and feel like a burnout because you just don't want to go to work anymore.
It's that trauma response, right?
yeah.
I was gonna say to the point of like just feeling under skilled for your job. That's definitely one. And when it comes to like just kind of helping people out, because you just think about the fact that a lot of things take energy, things that you might not realize are taking extra energy.
yeah.
So for me, it was like, okay, I can keep up with everybody around me, but we didn't have levels in our software engineering role. So I found that I was trying to stay on par with my peers who were actually very senior compared to me. And I didn't find that out until I was actually like, they split our jobs up into levels. And I was like, oh, no wonder I don't feel on track with like people 2 levels higher than me. So that helped a lot.
I think it's both. If you're underskilled or overskilled. Because if you're overskilled, you're like, yeah, I have to do this thing. It's really easy. And you start to get bored also. At some point, you're like, a manager of mine had this like really great job. He was paid very well. It was a pretty cool company. But then one day we were one of those yearly meetings and we were having a beer. It was like, hey, dude, I'm leaving. I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? Why? It's like the other day I was interviewing with another company just because a friend told me, and they had like this challenge, and I did this challenge. It was technical stuff, and it made me feel alive. And he left. I'm like, dude, you have a dream job, but he was just bored, and he started to get burned out, and he did this challenge. He felt alive, and that was enough. So
Yeah.
You'd mentioned the idea of potentially being in the wrong role, and as I mentioned, I'm a runner. And I've talked about how, athletes, especially sometimes track and field athletes, they might spend a whole career trying to find their perfect, discipline. They might be 200-meter runners their entire career, but they're potentially built to run the 4 or maybe even the 8. And, sometimes discovering that late in life is tough, and you run into situations or that you get moved, you're sent, you feel like you're a 200-meter runner, you're sent to the 4, you're still a world-class athlete, but you're potentially not ranking like you used to, like you did at the 2, but it might have been some kind of like team chemistry issue or like whatever it might be. So,
Michael Jordan with baseball. For me, that's a good one.
I mean, there are a lot of situations like that. Yeah.
So, as we're close to wrapping up here, I did want to mention there's a website it's just a quick survey to say, are you at risk for burnout?
Nice.
And it's burnoutindex.yerbo.co. We'll have that link shared out here. And what it does is it just asks you about a dozen questions, and it focuses on the 3 areas of exhaustion, cynicism, and efficacy. And if you score in certain ranges, it will give you advice to go seek medical or, you know, like talking to a psychiatrist or psychologist to get the help that you really need to try to get through this.
Or buy a bike.
Or what?
Or buy a bike.
Or buy a bike.
Or both. Yeah.
Or it just locks up your computer right away.
There you go.
So you can't, no access.
Yeah.
Thanks. So.
Thank you, everyone,
Yeah.
for the talk.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.